Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished feeding the last of her horses. The Arizona sun was beginning to set, painting the desert landscape in shades of orange and pink. She had moved to this remote ranch 3 years ago, seeking solitude after her husband's death in a car accident. The isolation had been exactly what she needed to heal, but lately she had been feeling the weight of loneliness more heavily than usual. As she walked toward her small farmhouse, something caught her eye near the old wooden barn. At first she thought it might be a coyote or wild dog that had wandered onto her property, but as she moved closer her heart began to race. It was a person, lying motionless on the ground. Sarah rushed forward, her boots kicking up dust as she ran. The figure was a Native American man, probably in his 30s, wearing traditional clothing that was now torn and blood-stained. His long black hair was matted with dirt and sweat, and his breathing was shallow and labored. Most concerning of all, there was a deep gash across his forehead, and his left arm appeared to be badly injured. She knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. It was weak but steady. The man's skin was hot to the touch, indicating a fever. Sarah had some basic medical training from her years as a veterinarian's assistant, but this was clearly beyond what she could handle alone. The nearest hospital was over an hour away, and cell phone service was spotty at best in this remote area. As she examined him more closely, she noticed something clutched tightly in his right hand. His fingers were wrapped around what appeared to be a small leather pouch, decorated with intricate beadwork. Even in his unconscious state, his grip on the item was firm, as if it contained something precious. Sarah made a quick decision. She couldn't leave him here to die, and she wasn't sure he would survive the long journey to the hospital in his current condition. She would have to bring him inside and do what she could to stabilize him first. Getting the unconscious man into her house proved to be more difficult than she had anticipated. He was tall and muscular, and moving him without causing further injury required careful planning. Sarah fetched an old tarp from the barn and managed to roll him onto it, then slowly dragged him across the yard and up the ramp she had built for her elderly dog. Once inside, she cleared off her dining room table and, with considerable effort, managed to get him onto it. The man remained unconscious throughout the entire process, which both worried and relieved her. At least he wasn't in pain, but his lack of response suggested his injuries might be more serious than they appeared. Sarah gathered her medical supplies, which were mostly intended for treating animals, but would have to suffice. She cleaned the head wound as gently as possible, revealing that it was deep but not life-threatening. The bleeding had mostly stopped, which was a good sign. His left arm, however, was clearly broken. She could see the unnatural angle of his wrist, and there was significant swelling. As she worked, Sarah found herself wondering how this man had ended up on her property. The nearest Apache reservation was over 50 miles away, and there were no major roads or hiking trails that would bring someone this far out. His clothes suggested he might be participating in some kind of traditional ceremony or cultural event, but that didn't explain his injuries or how he had traveled so far. The leather pouch remained firmly grasped in his hand throughout her examination. Sarah didn't want to force it away from him, sensing that it might be important. Instead, she worked around it, cleaning his other wounds and checking for additional injuries. After treating what she could, Sarah covered the man with a warm blanket and set up a chair beside the table to monitor him. She tried her cell phone again, hoping to get enough signal to call for help, but the screen showed no bars. The landline had been disconnected months ago when she decided she wanted complete isolation from the outside world. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself studying the man's face. Despite the injuries and dirt, she could see that he was handsome, with strong features and high cheekbones typical of Native American ancestry. There was something peaceful about his expression, even in unconsciousness, that made her feel oddly calm about the strange situation. Around midnight, his fever began to break, and his breathing became more regular. Sarah took this as a positive sign and allowed herself to doze in the chair. She woke several times during the night to check on him, noting that his condition seemed to be stabilizing. As dawn approached, Sarah was startled awake by a soft groan. She looked up to see the man's eyes beginning to flutter open. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with confusion as he tried to focus on his surroundings. "Don't try to move," Sarah said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're hurt, but you're safe. The man's eyes found hers, and she saw a flash of fear, followed quickly by gratitude. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. Sarah quickly brought him a glass of water, helping him take small sips. Where am I? He finally managed to ask, his voice accented but his English clear. You're at my ranch, Sarah explained. I found you collapsed near my barn yesterday evening. You were badly hurt. Do you remember what happened? The man closed his eyes, apparently trying to recall recent events. When he opened them again, there was urgency in his expression. He looked down at his hand, seeming relieved to see the leather pouch still there. I need to get back, he said, attempting to sit up despite Sarah's protests. My people, they're waiting for me. You have a concussion and a broken arm, Sarah said firmly. You're not going anywhere until you're better. What's your name? The man studied her face for a long moment as if trying to determine whether he could trust her. Finally, he spoke. I am Joseph, he said, Joseph Running Bear, and what I carry in my hand, it may be the key to saving my tribe's future. Sarah studied Joseph's face, trying to read the meaning behind his words. The leather pouch in his hand seemed to grow heavier with significance as she watched him protect it, even in his weakened state. She had lived near Apache land long enough to understand that their traditions and artifacts held deep spiritual meaning, but she had never been directly involved in anything like this. Your tribe's future, she asked gently, not wanting to pry but concerned about what might be at stake. Joseph, you nearly died out there. Whatever you're carrying, it won't help anyone if you don't survive to deliver it. Joseph's expression softened slightly as he recognized the genuine concern in her voice. He had expected to find hostility or at least suspicion from a white woman living alone in the desert. But Sarah's kindness was evident in every action she had taken to help him. There are some things that are worth dying for, he said quietly. My grandfather. He was the last keeper of certain knowledge. Before he passed 3 months ago, he entrusted me with this. He lifted his hand slightly, indicating the pouch. Inside are seeds that have been protected by our people for over 200 years. Sarah sat down in the chair beside him, her interest piqued. As someone who had always been fascinated by plants and agriculture, she understood the potential importance of preserved seeds, especially those with historical significance. What kind of seeds? She asked. Joseph hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal to this stranger who had saved his life. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. They are corn seeds, but not ordinary corn. These varieties were developed by our ancestors before the government forced us onto reservations. They can grow in conditions that would kill modern crops. With the drought that has been affecting our land for the past 5 years, our people are struggling to maintain traditional farming methods. These seeds could restore our agricultural independence. The weight of responsibility in Joseph's voice was unmistakable. Sarah began to understand why he had been willing to risk his life traveling across the dangerous desert terrain. Food security was a matter of survival for any community. But for a Native American tribe trying to maintain their traditional way of life, it represented something even more profound. How did you end up here? Sarah asked. The reservation is 50 miles from here, and there's nothing but rough country in between. Joseph closed his eyes again, and Sarah could see him working through painful memories. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion and regret. I was supposed to meet with a group of agricultural scientists at the university. They had requested samples of our heritage seeds for a preservation project. Our tribal council debated for weeks about whether to trust them. He paused, taking a careful breath. I was against it. These seeds represent something sacred to our people, not just scientific curiosities for researchers to study. Sarah could hear the conflict in his voice. She understood that he had been caught between preserving tradition and potentially helping his people survive in a changing world. But you were taking them anyway? She prompted gently. The council voted to share small samples, hoping the scientists could help us develop better growing techniques while preserving the original strains. I disagreed, but I followed the decisions of our elders. Joseph's jaw tightened. I should have trusted my instincts. He went on to explain how he had set out 3 days earlier, taking back roads to avoid main highways where he might encounter people who would question a Native American man traveling alone with what appeared to be valuable items. He had been making good progress until his truck broke down about 15 miles from Sarah's ranch. I tried to fix it myself, but the engine seized completely. No cell phone signal, no traffic on that road. I knew I had to keep moving or risk dying in the heat. Joseph's voice grew weaker as he relived the ordeal. I started walking, hoping to find help or at least a main road. But the heat was worse than I expected, and I wasn't carrying enough water. Sarah could imagine the desperate journey across the unforgiving desert landscape. Even experienced hikers died from dehydration and heat exposure in this region every year. For someone already dealing with the stress of carrying precious cargo, the physical and mental strain must have been overwhelming. I remember getting dizzy and stumbling. There were rocks. I must have hit my head when I fell. Joseph looked down at his injured arm. I kept walking, but everything became confused. I was following what I thought was a path, but I must have been walking in circles. The story explained the condition Sarah had found him in, but it also raised new concerns. If Joseph had been expected at the university, people would be looking for him by now. And if the seeds he carried were as important as he claimed, there might be others searching for them as well. "Joseph, how many people knew about your trip?" Sarah asked. "The tribal council, the university researchers, and—" Joseph's expression darkened. There was a man at the meeting with the scientists. He wasn't faculty, but he seemed very interested in our agricultural practices. He asked a lot of specific questions about our seed preservation methods. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She had heard stories about corporate agricultural companies that went to great lengths to acquire genetic material from traditional crops. The value of heritage seeds, especially those adapted to harsh conditions, could be enormous in the right hands. What did this man look like? She asked. Expensive suit even in the heat. Short gray hair, very intense eyes. He had business cards, but I didn't pay attention to the company name. He kept asking about locations where we stored our seed collections and whether we had written records of our growing techniques. Sarah's concern deepened. If someone with questionable motives knew about Joseph's journey, his collapse near her property might not have been as random as it appeared. She thought about the isolation of her ranch, how someone could approach without being seen, and realized that both she and Joseph might be in more danger than either of them had initially understood. "Joseph, I think we need to consider the possibility that your truck breakdown wasn't an accident," Sarah said carefully. "And if that's the case, staying here might not be safe for either of us." Joseph's eyes widened as he grasped the implications of her words. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, his protective instincts kicked in immediately. "I cannot put you in danger because of my responsibilities," he said, attempting once again to sit up. "I must leave and find another way to protect these seeds." "You can barely stand and you have no transportation," Sarah pointed out. "Besides, if someone is after those seeds, they've probably already tracked your route this far. Running away now would just make you an easier target." She stood up and walked to the window, scanning the horizon for any signs of approaching vehicles or other threats. The desert appeared empty, but she knew that could change quickly. "There might be another option," Sarah said slowly, turning back to face Joseph. "But it would mean trusting me with something I suspect you've never shared with an outsider before." Joseph studied Sarah's face intently, his dark eyes searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. Years of living on a reservation had taught him to be cautious about trusting outsiders, especially when sacred tribal materials were involved. Yet something about this woman's straightforward manner and the genuine care she had shown him suggested that her offer might be sincere. "What are you proposing?" he asked quietly. Sarah returned to her chair, choosing her words carefully. She understood that what she was about to suggest would require Joseph to violate centuries of tribal tradition about protecting sacred knowledge from outsiders. "I have extensive experience with plant cultivation and seed preservation," she began. "Before I moved here, I worked for 12 years as a research assistant at an agricultural extension office. I specialized in heritage varieties and drought-resistant crops." She paused, letting this information sink in. "If someone is trying to steal your seeds, the best protection might be to ensure they survive, even if the originals are taken." Joseph's grip on the leather pouch tightened slightly. "You want me to give you some of the seeds? I want to help you create backup collections," Sarah corrected. "Hidden in multiple locations using proper preservation techniques. If these varieties are as important as you say, then losing them entirely would be a tragedy not just for your people, but for everyone who might benefit from drought-resistant crops in the future." The logic of her argument was sound, but Joseph could see the cultural complications immediately. These seeds weren't just agricultural resources. They were sacred trust passed down through generations of Apache keepers. Sharing them with an outsider, even one with good intentions, would be unprecedented. My people have protected these varieties for 2 centuries without outside help, Joseph said. But his tone suggested he was considering her proposal rather than rejecting it outright. And they've done an amazing job, Sarah acknowledged. But the world has changed. Corporate agriculture, climate change, genetic modification. These are threats your ancestors never had to face. Sometimes, traditional methods need to be combined with modern knowledge to ensure survival. As if to emphasize her point, the sound of an approaching vehicle reached them from the distance. Both Sarah and Joseph froze, listening as the engine sound grew closer. It was moving slowly, as if the driver was searching for something. Sarah moved quickly to the window and peered through the curtains. A black SUV with tinted windows was making its way up her long driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. The vehicle looked expensive and official, definitely not the type that belonged to any of her few local neighbors. "Someone's coming," she whispered urgently. "That's not a car I recognize." Joseph tried to sit up again, his face pale but determined. "I need to hide the seeds." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You need to trust me. Give me half of them right now. I can hide them where no one will think to look, and if something happens to the originals, your tribe will still have options." The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside. Through the window, Sarah could see 2 men in dark suits walking toward her front door. One of them matched Joseph's description of the man from the university meeting. "Joseph, decide now," Sarah urged. "We're out of time." For a moment, Joseph hesitated, the weight of generations of tradition holding him back. Then he looked at Sarah's determined face and made a decision that went against everything he had been taught about protecting tribal secrets. With trembling fingers, he opened the leather pouch. Inside were dozens of seeds of various sizes and colors, each variety carefully separated in small compartments lined with soft cloth. The seeds looked ancient, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands that had planted, harvested, and preserved them over the centuries. "Take these," Joseph whispered, selecting about half of the seeds and pressing them into Sarah's palm. "The smaller yellow ones are a type of corn that can survive with very little water. The red ones produce grain that can be stored for years without spoiling. The black seeds are from a plant that can grow in soil too salty for other crops." Sarah quickly grabbed a clean kitchen towel and wrapped the seeds carefully. A loud knock echoed from the front door, followed by an authoritative voice calling out, "This is Agent Rodriguez with the Department of Agriculture. We need to speak with you about a missing person case." Sarah's mind raced. These weren't just corporate representatives, they were claiming to be federal agents. The situation was more serious than either she or Joseph had realized. "The root cellar," Sarah whispered to Joseph, pointing toward a barely visible trapdoor near the back of the kitchen. "It stays cool and dry down there. I can hide these with my own seed collection." She quickly moved to the trapdoor and lifted it, revealing a narrow ladder leading down into darkness. The space below had been carved out of solid rock by the previous owner and served as a natural storage area for preserved foods and supplies. "Ma'am, we know you're home," the voice called again. "Your truck is in the driveway. Please open the door." Sarah climbed partway down the ladder and tucked the wrapped seeds behind several large jars of preserved vegetables. The hiding spot was perfect. The seeds would be protected from temperature fluctuations and humidity, and no casual search would reveal them. When she emerged from the cellar, Joseph was attempting to rearrange himself on the table to look as if he had been unconscious the entire time. His face was gray with pain from the movement, but his eyes were alert and grateful. "Remember," Sarah whispered as she walked toward the front door, "you don't remember anything after your accident. You just woke up a few minutes ago." She took a deep breath and opened the door to find 2 men in identical dark suits standing on her porch. The older one, who matched Joseph's description, stepped forward with a badge and identification. "Agent Rodriguez, Department of Agriculture," he said in a tone that suggested he was used to being obeyed without question. "This is Agent Chen, We're investigating the disappearance of Joseph Running Bear, a member of the Apache tribe who was carrying sensitive agricultural materials. Sarah forced herself to appear calm and slightly confused. I'm sorry, officers, but I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? Mr. Running Bear's truck was found abandoned about 15 miles from here, Agent Chen explained. We have reason to believe he continued on foot in this direction. Have you seen any sign of him? Actually, yes, Sarah said, stepping aside to let them enter. I found an injured man near my barn yesterday evening. I brought him inside to treat his wounds. He's been unconscious most of the time. The agents exchanged glances, and Sarah could see the relief in their expressions. They clearly believed they had found what they were looking for. We'll need to see him immediately, Rodriguez said, already moving toward the interior of the house. Of course, Sarah replied, leading them to the dining room where Joseph lay. But I should warn you, he has a serious head injury and a broken arm. He only regained consciousness a few minutes ago. As the agents approached Joseph, Sarah noticed Rodriguez's eyes immediately focus on the leather pouch still clutched in Joseph's hand. There was an intensity in his gaze that confirmed her suspicions about his true motives. Mr. Running Bear, Rodriguez said in a voice that was supposed to sound concerned, but came across as predatory. We've been looking for you. Are you able to speak? Joseph opened his eyes slowly, doing an excellent job of appearing disoriented and weak. Who are you? He asked in a hoarse whisper. We're here to help you, Chen said more gently than his partner. You were supposed to arrive at the university 2 days ago. People have been worried about you. Joseph's eyes moved between the two agents, and Sarah could see him processing the situation carefully. University? He said uncertainly. I remember. Driving. Then nothing until I woke up here. Rodriguez stepped closer, his attention still fixed on the pouch. Mr. Running Bear, you were carrying some very important materials when you left the reservation. We need to make sure they're safe. It was then that Sarah realized these men might not actually be federal agents at all. Their interest seemed far too focused on the seeds and not nearly concerned enough about Joseph's physical condition. She began to wonder if they had somehow staged his truck breakdown to begin with. Important materials? Joseph asked, doing an excellent job of appearing confused. I don't remember. Rodriguez's patience was clearly wearing thin. The seeds, Mr. Running Bear. The heritage corn varieties your tribe agreed to share with our agricultural research program. Sarah watched as Joseph's hand tightened protectively around the pouch, a gesture that could be interpreted as either confusion or instinctive protection. She held her breath, hoping that their hastily arranged deception would hold up under scrutiny. Joseph stared at the two men with what appeared to be genuine confusion, though Sarah could see the sharp intelligence behind his eyes as he carefully considered his response. The leather pouch remained clutched in his hand, and she noticed that his knuckles had gone white from the tension of gripping it so tightly. Seeds? Joseph said slowly, as if the word was foreign to him. My head hurts so much. I can't remember why I was driving or where I was going. Agent Rodriguez stepped closer, and Sarah could see the frustration building in his expression. His partner, Chen, seemed more concerned about Joseph's obvious injuries, but Rodriguez was clearly focused on only one thing. Mr. Running Bear, you signed an agreement with the university's agricultural department. Rodriguez pressed. You were bringing samples of your tribe's heritage corn varieties for our research program. Surely you remember something about that. Sarah watched Joseph's performance with growing admiration. Despite his pain and the dangerous situation, he was managing to project exactly the right combination of confusion and weakness that someone with a serious head injury might display. Agreement? Joseph touched his bandaged forehead gingerly. I'm sorry, I don't remember signing anything. Are you sure you have the right person? Chen pulled out a folder and showed Joseph a photograph that appeared to be from a tribal council meeting. This is you, isn't it? Meeting with university representatives 3 weeks ago? Joseph studied the photo for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. The face looks familiar, but I can't remember when that was taken or why I would have been there. Sarah could see that Rodriguez was growing increasingly agitated. His cover story was being undermined by Joseph's apparent memory loss, and he clearly hadn't planned for this complication. Perhaps we should take Mr. Running Bear to a hospital, Chen suggested to his partner. He obviously needs proper medical attention, and the doctors there might be able to help with his memory issues. No, Rodriguez said quickly, then seemed to realize how abrupt he sounded. I mean, we should contact his tribal authorities first. They'll want to know he's been found and they can arrange for appropriate medical care. Sarah felt a chill at the suggestion. If these men weren't legitimate federal agents, the last thing they would want would be to involve actual tribal authorities or medical professionals who might ask difficult questions. Actually, Sarah interjected, I've already called for an ambulance. They should be here within the hour. This was a complete lie, but she wanted to see how the two men would react to the prospect of official medical intervention. Rodriguez's face darkened immediately. That won't be necessary, he said firmly. We can transport Mr. Running Bear ourselves. We have medical personnel standing by. I think we should wait for the ambulance, Sarah insisted. He has a serious head injury and a broken arm. Moving him incorrectly could cause permanent damage. The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Sarah could see that Rodriguez was running out of patience with the situation, while Chen seemed genuinely conflicted about the best course of action. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, turning his full attention to Sarah for the first time. I appreciate your concern, but this is now a federal matter. We'll take responsibility for Mr. Running Bear's care from this point forward. Federal matter? Sarah asked, allowing confusion to creep into her voice. I thought you said this was about missing agricultural samples. Why would that involve federal agents? She could see that her question had caught Rodriguez off guard. He clearly hadn't expected to have to explain his authority or justify his presence to a civilian. Certain types of genetic material fall under federal jurisdiction, he said vaguely, especially when they involve Native American cultural artifacts. Sarah knew enough about federal law to recognize that this explanation didn't make much sense. While there were indeed laws protecting Native American cultural property, agricultural seeds wouldn't typically fall under the same regulations unless they had some kind of religious or ceremonial significance. Could I see your identification again? Sarah asked politely. I'd like to write down the case number for my insurance company. Since this happened on my property, I want to make sure everything is properly documented. Rodriguez's jaw tightened slightly, but he handed over his badge and identification. Sarah studied them carefully, noting details that she could check later if she had the opportunity. While she was examining the credentials, Joseph suddenly groaned and appeared to lose consciousness again. His hand relaxed slightly around the leather pouch, and Rodriguez immediately noticed the change. He's getting worse, Chen observed with genuine concern. We really should get him to a hospital. I'll check his vital signs, Sarah said, moving to Joseph's side. As she leaned over him, she whispered almost inaudibly, Play unconscious. I think they're going to try to take the pouch. Joseph's breathing remained steady, and he gave no sign that he had heard her. But Sarah felt confident that he understood the situation. His pulse is irregular, Sarah announced, though she hadn't actually checked it, and his breathing seems more labored than before. I really think we should wait for professional medical help. Rodriguez stepped closer to the table, his eyes fixed on Joseph's relaxed grip on the leather pouch. Maybe we should secure his personal effects, he suggested. Make sure nothing gets lost during transport. That's probably a good idea, Sarah agreed while mentally preparing to intervene if necessary. Though I should probably inventory everything first, for liability purposes. She could see Rodriguez's frustration growing as she continued to create bureaucratic obstacles to his obvious goal of separating Joseph from the seeds. Chen, meanwhile, was genuinely focused on Joseph's condition and seemed increasingly concerned about his partner's priorities. Rodriguez, Chen said quietly, shouldn't we be more worried about getting this man medical attention than about some agricultural samples? The samples are irreplaceable, Rodriguez replied tersely. If they're lost or damaged, years of research could be set back. Sarah caught the slip immediately. If Rodriguez were genuinely a federal agricultural agent, he would know that the loss of research samples, while unfortunate, wouldn't typically warrant this level of urgent response. His reaction suggested that the seeds had value beyond mere scientific research. At that moment, the sound of another vehicle approaching reached them from outside. This time it was the distinctive rumble of a large truck, and Sarah could hear multiple voices as doors slammed. Rodriguez and Chen exchanged alarmed glances, clearly not expecting additional arrivals. Through the window, Sarah could see a pickup truck with tribal license plates, and several Native American men were getting out. "Looks like word has gotten out that Joseph was found," Sarah said with relief that wasn't entirely feigned. "Those are probably members of his tribal council." The color drained from Rodriguez's face as he realized that his window of opportunity was rapidly closing. If legitimate tribal representatives were arriving, his ability to simply walk away with the seeds would become much more complicated. "We need to leave," he said urgently to Chen. "Our extraction team is waiting." Chen looked confused by his partner's sudden desire to depart. "Shouldn't we coordinate with the tribal authorities? They'll want a full briefing on the recovery operation." "There's no time," Rodriguez insisted, moving toward Joseph with clear intent to grab the leather pouch. "We'll file our report later." Sarah positioned herself between Rodriguez and Joseph, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I think you should wait and speak with the tribal representatives. They're probably better equipped to handle Joseph's cultural and medical needs." "Get out of the way," Rodriguez said, his friendly federal agent facade finally dropping completely. It was at that moment that the front door opened and 3 Apache men entered without knocking. The oldest of them, a man in his 60s with gray braids and wearing traditional clothing mixed with modern elements, surveyed the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I am Robert Standing Bear," he announced in a voice that carried natural authority. "Joseph Running Bear is my nephew. We received word that he had been found." Rodriguez straightened up, trying to reassert his official persona, but Sarah could see that he was badly rattled by this development. "Agent Rodriguez, Department of Agriculture," he said, extending his hand. "We were just preparing to transport Mr. Running Bear for medical evaluation." Robert Standing Bear studied Rodriguez's face for a long moment without taking the offered hand. When he spoke again, his tone was cold and suspicious. "Funny," he said quietly, "because I just spoke with the real Department of Agriculture 20 minutes ago. They've never heard of Agent Rodriguez." The silence in the room was deafening as Robert Standing Bear's words hung in the air. Rodriguez's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to anger to calculation, as he realized his cover had been completely blown. Chen looked genuinely confused and alarmed, suggesting that he might not have been fully aware of his partner's true agenda. "There must be some mistake," Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Different departments, bureaucratic confusion, you know how it is." "No mistake," Robert Standing Bear replied firmly. He gestured to the 2 younger men who had accompanied him. "These are tribal police officers. We've been tracking you since you left the reservation 3 days ago." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized that help had arrived, but she also understood that the situation was far from over. Rodriguez still appeared to be calculating his options, and she could see him eyeing the exits. One of the tribal police officers, a tall man with alert eyes, stepped forward and addressed Rodriguez directly. "We'd like to see some legitimate identification, please, and we'll need an explanation for why you've been impersonating federal agents." "This is ridiculous," Rodriguez blustered. "We're here on official business. If there's been some communication breakdown between agencies, that's not our fault." "Actually," Chen said suddenly, his voice uncertain, "I think I need to see your credentials again too, Rodriguez. Some things about this assignment haven't made sense from the beginning." Rodriguez shot his partner a sharp look, but it was clear that Chen was beginning to piece together inconsistencies that he had previously overlooked. Robert Standing Bear moved to Joseph's side, his weathered face showing concern for his nephew's condition. "Joseph," he said softly, "it's Uncle Robert. Can you hear me?" Joseph's eyes fluttered open, and this time his confusion appeared genuine as he saw his uncle's familiar face. "Uncle Robert? How did you find me?" "When you didn't arrive at the university, we started tracking your route," Robert explained gently. "We found your truck and followed your trail. This kind woman has been taking care of you." Joseph's eyes moved to Sarah, and she could see gratitude and something deeper in his expression. Despite the dangerous situation they had just navigated together, there was a connection forming between them that went beyond their temporary alliance. "The seeds," Joseph whispered urgently to his uncle. "Are they safe?" Robert's eyes immediately went to the leather pouch still clutched in Joseph's hand, then moved to survey the room. Sarah could see him taking in the presence of the fake agents and understanding that the situation was more complicated than a simple rescue operation. "We'll discuss that later," Robert said carefully. "Right now, we need to get you proper medical attention." Rodriguez, seeing that his opportunity was slipping away entirely, made a desperate decision. He lunged toward Joseph, reaching for the leather pouch with clear intent to grab it and run. What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah barely had time to process it. The tribal police officer moved to intercept Rodriguez, while Chen, apparently finally understanding what was really happening, grabbed his partner's arm. "What are you doing?" Chen shouted. "These aren't our orders." "Get off me!" Rodriguez snarled, struggling against both men. "You have no idea what's at stake here." In the chaos of the struggle, Rodriguez managed to break free and made another desperate grab for the pouch. Joseph, despite his injuries, pulled it protectively against his chest, but the sudden movement caused him to cry out in pain as his broken arm was jarred. Sarah acted on pure instinct. She grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from a nearby shelf and brought it down on Rodriguez's shoulder, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but with sufficient force to stop his advance. The impact sent him stumbling backward into Chen, who was still trying to understand what his partner had gotten him involved in. "Everybody stop," Robert Standing Bear commanded in a voice that immediately brought order to the chaos. "Officer Martinez, please restrain this man. Officer Yazzie, check the perimeter and make sure there are no other threats." The tribal police moved efficiently to secure Rodriguez, who was now breathing heavily and glaring at everyone in the room with undisguised fury. Chen raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, clearly wanting to distance himself from whatever illegal activities his partner had been involved in. "I had no idea," Chen said to Robert Standing Bear. "I thought this was a legitimate federal operation. Rodriguez told me we were recovering stolen government property. What organization do you actually work for?" Robert asked Rodriguez directly. Rodriguez remained silent, his jaw clenched in defiance. It was Chen who provided the answer, as understanding finally dawned on his face. "Meridian Agricultural Solutions," Chen said quietly. "That's who cut our paychecks. But Rodriguez told me we were contracted by the government for this operation." Sarah had heard of Meridian Agricultural Solutions. They were one of the largest agribusiness corporations in the world, known for their aggressive acquisition of genetic material from traditional crops. The company had been involved in several controversies over the years related to biopiracy and the exploitation of indigenous agricultural knowledge. "They sent you to steal our seeds," Robert said, and it wasn't a question. "Those seeds could feed millions of people," Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice filled with the conviction of someone who believed his own justifications. "Your people are sitting on genetic material that could revolutionize drought-resistant agriculture, and you're keeping it locked away because of superstition and tradition." "Those seeds are not just agricultural resources," Robert replied calmly, but Sarah could hear the steel beneath his controlled tone. "They are part of our cultural heritage developed over centuries by our ancestors. They represent our connection to the land and our ability to sustain ourselves as a people." Joseph struggled to sit up, still clutching the pouch protectively. "The tribal council voted to share samples with legitimate researchers," he said weakly. "We weren't keeping anything locked away. We were trying to find a way to help while preserving our traditions. But apparently someone at the university leaked information about the transfer to Meridian," Sarah added, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "They saw an opportunity to get the seeds without having to go through proper channels or respect tribal sovereignty." Rodriguez's expression confirmed her theory. Corporate espionage in the agricultural sector was more common than most people realized, especially when it came to genetic material from indigenous crops that had taken generations to develop. "How did you sabotage Joseph's truck?" Robert asked. "Sugar in the gas tank," Chen answered before Rodriguez could stop him. Rodriguez said it was standard procedure to create a controlled breakdown so we could approach the target in a vulnerable state. Sarah felt sick as she realized how carefully the whole operation had been planned. Joseph could have died wandering in the desert, and these men had been willing to accept that risk to get their hands on the seeds. "Uncle Robert," Joseph said urgently, "there's something else you need to know. I gave half of the seeds to Sarah for safekeeping. They're hidden where no one can find them." Robert's eyes widened in surprise, and Sarah could see him struggling with the implications of this revelation. Joseph had broken with centuries of tradition by sharing sacred seeds with an outsider, even under these extreme circumstances. "You did what?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She saved my life, Joseph said firmly, and she understood what was at stake. If these men had succeeded in taking the original collection, our people would have lost everything. Now at least the seeds will survive. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as Robert Standing Bear's penetrating gaze fixed on her. She understood that she had become part of something much larger than a simple rescue operation. "Where are they?" Robert asked her directly. "Hidden safely on my property," Sarah replied. "I have experience with seed preservation. They'll remain viable for years if necessary." Robert was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with tradition and pragmatism. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Perhaps Joseph made the right choice," he said. "But this creates new complications. You now hold part of our people's heritage, and that comes with responsibilities." Before Sarah could respond, Officer Martinez called out from the window. "More vehicles approaching. Looks like real federal agents this time." Through the window, Sarah could see a convoy of government vehicles making their way up her driveway. Unlike Rodriguez and Chen's single black SUV, these vehicles had visible government markings and were accompanied by what appeared to be FBI agents. "It seems the real authorities have finally arrived," Robert said with satisfaction. "We called them as soon as we realized Joseph was missing and that there were people impersonating federal agents." Rodriguez's face went pale as he realized that his troubles were just beginning. Corporate espionage, impersonating federal officers, and attempted theft of cultural property were serious federal crimes that would likely result in significant prison time. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, suddenly aware that her quiet, isolated life was about to become much more complicated. "Now we sort out this mess," Robert replied, "and we figure out what to do about the fact that you're now a keeper of Apache heritage seeds." As the real federal agents approached the house, Sarah realized that finding Joseph collapsed near her barn had indeed transformed everything, but in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next several hours passed in a whirlwind of official interviews, evidence collection, and medical examinations. The real federal agents, led by a no-nonsense FBI supervisor named Agent Patricia Williams, took detailed statements from everyone involved, while EMTs finally gave Joseph the proper medical attention he desperately needed. Sarah watched from her living room window as Rodriguez and Chen were loaded into separate federal vehicles. Chen appeared relieved to be cooperating fully with the investigation, while Rodriguez maintained his defiant silence even as he was read his rights for multiple federal crimes. "Ma'am," Agent Williams approached Sarah as the last of the evidence collection was being completed. "I'll need to speak with you privately about your role in protecting the cultural materials." Sarah nodded, leading the agent to her kitchen where they could speak without being overheard. She was nervous about this conversation, knowing that her decision to hide half of the seeds could potentially be viewed as interfering with a federal investigation. "From what I understand," Agent Williams began, "you made a split-second decision to protect half of the seed collection when you realized Mr. Running Bear was in danger. Is that correct?" "Yes," Sarah replied honestly. "It seemed like the only way to ensure the seeds would survive if the fake agents managed to take the originals." Agent Williams studied her carefully. "You realize that those seeds are now evidence in a federal case involving corporate espionage and attempted theft of Native American cultural property?" Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't considered that the seeds might need to be turned over as evidence, which could potentially put them at risk of being lost in the legal system. "However," Agent Williams continued, "the tribal authorities have made it clear that they consider you a temporary guardian rather than a theft suspect. They've requested that the seeds remain in your custody until the legal proceedings are complete." Relief flooded through Sarah. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you'll need to maintain the seeds using proper preservation techniques until the court case is resolved. The tribe will provide you with detailed instructions, and federal agricultural experts will periodically inspect your storage methods to ensure the seeds remain viable." Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see Robert Standing Bear speaking intensely with Joseph, who was now sitting in the back of an ambulance while EMTs prepared him for transport to the hospital. Despite the chaos of the day, she found her attention drawn to Joseph's face, noting the way he seemed to find strength in his uncle's presence. "There's something else," Agent Williams added. "The investigation has revealed that Meridian Agricultural Solutions has been targeting indigenous seed collections across the southwestern United States." Your actions today may have prevented the loss of one of the most significant heritage collections in the region. Sarah absorbed this information with growing understanding of just how much had been at stake. What had begun as a simple act of compassion in helping an injured stranger had apparently played a crucial role in protecting centuries of agricultural knowledge. "Agent Williams," Sarah asked, "what happens to the seeds after the legal case is resolved?" "That will be up to the tribal council to decide. But given the unprecedented nature of this situation, I suspect they'll want to establish new protocols for protecting their agricultural heritage." As the agent finished her questioning, Robert Standing Bear approached the house. Sarah could see that he wanted to speak with her before Joseph was taken to the hospital. "Ms. Sarah," Robert said formally as he entered the kitchen, "my nephew will be taken to the medical center in Tucson for proper treatment of his injuries. But before he goes, there are things that need to be discussed about the responsibility you have undertaken." Sarah nodded, understanding that this conversation would determine her relationship with the Apache community going forward. "In our tradition," Robert continued, "the keeper of heritage seeds holds a sacred trust. These varieties have been protected by my family for 7 generations. When Joseph placed half of our collection in your hands, he made you part of that sacred trust." The weight of his words settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She had acted on instinct to protect something precious, but she was beginning to understand that the implications extended far beyond the immediate crisis. "I understand the responsibility," Sarah said quietly. "I'll do everything in my power to protect them." "It's not just about protection," Robert explained. "The seeds must be understood, cultivated, and preserved using methods that honor their spiritual significance as well as their agricultural value. This requires knowledge that has been passed down through generations of our people." Sarah felt a moment of panic. "Are you saying I'm not qualified to care for them?" "I'm saying that you'll need to learn," Robert replied, and for the first time since arriving, his stern expression softened slightly. "My nephew believes you can be trusted with this knowledge. Given what you've done today, I'm inclined to agree with him." Through the window, Sarah could see Joseph watching their conversation from the ambulance. Even from a distance, she could see the concern in his eyes, though whether it was about the seeds or about her, she couldn't tell. "What would that involve?" Sarah asked. "You would need to come to the reservation regularly to learn our traditional growing methods. You would need to understand the spiritual practices associated with planting and harvesting, and you would need to accept that you're no longer just caring for seeds, but for a living piece of our cultural heritage." Sarah thought about her isolated life on the ranch, the solitude she had sought after her husband's death, and the simple existence she had built for herself. What Robert was proposing would change all of that fundamentally. "And if I'm not able to take on that responsibility," she asked, "then the seeds would need to be returned to the tribe, and we would have to start over with developing new preservation strategies," Robert replied honestly. "But that would leave us vulnerable to future attacks like the one we just experienced." Before Sarah could respond, Joseph appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had apparently convinced the EMTs to let him speak with them before being transported to the hospital. "Uncle Robert," Joseph said, his voice still weak but determined, "I need to say something." He looked directly at Sarah, and she could see the intensity of his conviction, despite his obvious exhaustion and pain. "Sarah didn't just save the seeds today," Joseph said. "She saved my life, and she understood immediately what was at stake. She made decisions that protected our heritage, without even knowing what she was protecting." Robert listened to his nephews, words with the careful attention he would give to any important tribal matter. "More than that," Joseph continued, "she has the knowledge and skills that our people need to adapt our traditional methods to modern challenges. The drought that's been affecting our land isn't going away. Climate change is real, and we need to combine our ancient wisdom with modern agricultural science if we're going to survive." Sarah felt moved by Joseph's faith in her abilities, but she also understood that he was proposing something that would fundamentally change both of their lives. "Joseph," she said gently, "you're talking about bridging 2 very different worlds. That's not something that can be done quickly or easily." "No," Joseph agreed, "but it's something that needs to be done, and after today I believe you're the person who can help us do it." Robert Standing Bear studied both of them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well," he said finally. "If you're willing to undertake this responsibility, Sarah, We'll begin your education in our traditional methods next week. But understand that this is not just about agriculture. You'll be learning about our culture, our spiritual practices, and our way of understanding the relationship between people and the land. Sarah looked out at her ranch, at the desert landscape that had been her refuge for 3 years, and realized that her quiet, solitary life was about to become something entirely different. But as she looked at Joseph's hopeful expression and thought about the precious seeds hidden in her root cellar, she knew there was really only one answer she could give. "I accept the responsibility," she said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect them and to learn what I need to know." Robert nodded with what might have been approval, while Joseph's face broke into the first genuine smile she had seen from him since finding him collapsed near her barn. "Good," Robert said, "because this is just the beginning of a much larger story." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the middle of a thriving garden that would have been impossible to imagine when she first found Joseph collapsed near her barn. The plot of land behind her house had been transformed into a carefully planned agricultural experiment, where ancient Apache growing techniques were being combined with modern water conservation methods. The heritage corn varieties from Joseph's seed collection had not only survived but flourished in the harsh desert conditions. Rows of sturdy stalks swayed in the morning breeze, their leaves a deeper green than any commercial corn Sarah had ever seen. Interspersed among the corn were the salt-tolerant plants that could grow in soil too harsh for conventional crops, their unusual purple flowers adding unexpected beauty to the practical garden. Joseph emerged from behind the tool shed, his movements still slightly careful due to his healing arm, but otherwise showing no signs of his ordeal. He had been spending 3 days a week at Sarah's ranch, teaching her the traditional methods his grandfather had passed down to him, while learning from her expertise in modern agricultural techniques. "The morning inspection looks good," Joseph said, approaching with a notebook where they recorded daily observations about plant growth, soil conditions, and water usage. "The corn should be ready for harvest in another 3 weeks." Sarah looked up from the irrigation system she had been adjusting, a hybrid design that combined traditional Apache water management with modern drip irrigation technology. The system used 50% less water than conventional farming methods while producing better yields than either traditional or modern techniques alone. "Have you heard back from the university about their research proposal?" Sarah asked, wiping her hands on a cloth. Joseph nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Dr. Martinez wants to document our combined methods and publish the results, but the tribal council is still debating whether to allow it." This had become an ongoing discussion over the past several months. The success of their agricultural experiment had attracted attention from legitimate research institutions who wanted to study their methods for potential application in other drought-affected regions. However, the tribe remained cautious about sharing their knowledge, especially after the experience with Meridian Agricultural Solutions. "I think I understand their hesitation," Sarah said. "After what happened with Rodriguez and those corporate thieves, trust doesn't come easily." "It's more complicated than that," Joseph explained, settling onto a bench they had built under a shade structure, made from traditional materials. "Some of the elders believe that what we're doing here changes the essential nature of our agricultural practices. They worry that combining our methods with outside knowledge dilutes their spiritual significance." Sarah joined him on the bench, looking out over the garden that had become the center of both their lives. She understood the elders' concerns. Over the past 6 months, she had learned that Apache agriculture was about much more than just growing food. It was connected to spiritual practices, seasonal ceremonies, and a complex understanding of the relationship between people and the land. "What do you think?" Sarah asked. "Are we changing something essential?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had spent months wrestling with difficult questions. "I think our ancestors would recognize what we're doing here," he said finally. "They adapted their methods when they encountered new environments, new challenges, and new opportunities. What we're doing is the same kind of adaptation, just on a larger scale." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Sarah looked up to see Robert Standing Bear's truck making its way up the driveway, followed by 2 other vehicles she didn't recognize. "That's the delegation from the tribal council," Joseph said, checking his watch. "They're here for the final evaluation." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. Today's visit would determine whether the tribal council approved of their work and allowed it to continue, or whether they would decide that the experiment had gone too far from traditional practices. As the vehicles parked near the house, Sarah could see that Robert had brought several tribal elders, including some she had not met before. Their expressions were serious as they emerged from the trucks, and she could tell that this would not be a casual inspection. "Joseph, Sarah," Robert called out as the group approached, "the council is ready to see what you've accomplished." For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Joseph led the delegation through every aspect of their agricultural project. They explained the growing techniques, demonstrated the irrigation system, and showed detailed records of crop yields, water usage, and soil improvement. The elders listened carefully, asking detailed questions about everything from seed storage methods to the timing of planting ceremonies. Sarah was impressed by their depth of knowledge and their ability to understand both the traditional and modern aspects of what she and Joseph had created. "The yields are impressive," admitted Eleanor Whitefeather, the oldest member of the delegation, and someone whose opinion carried significant weight within the tribal community. "And the water conservation results are better than anything we've achieved using purely traditional methods. But," added another elder, "we need to understand whether these methods can be practiced in a way that maintains our spiritual connection to the land." Joseph stepped forward, his voice respectful but confident. "Grandmother Eleanor, we've incorporated the traditional planting songs, the seasonal ceremonies, and the blessing rituals into every aspect of our work here. Sarah has learned not just our growing techniques, but the spiritual practices that give them meaning." To demonstrate his point, Joseph led the group to a small ceremonial area at the center of the garden, where Sarah had learned to perform the traditional blessing of the seeds before planting. The area was marked with stones arranged according to Apache custom, and prayer offerings were renewed regularly according to the ceremonial calendar. Eleanor Whitefeather studied the ceremonial area carefully, then turned to Sarah with a penetrating gaze. "You've learned our songs?" she asked. Sarah nodded, then began to sing one of the traditional planting songs in the Apache language. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but the melody and rhythm showed that she had learned not just the words, but the spiritual intention behind them. When Sarah finished, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then unexpectedly she smiled. "Your accent needs work," Eleanor said, "but your heart understands the song." The tension that had been building throughout the morning seemed to ease as the other elders nodded their approval. Sarah realized that she had just passed some kind of test that went far beyond agricultural techniques or crop yields. "The council has made a decision," Robert announced formally. "We approve of the work being done here and we want it to continue. But we also want it to expand." Sarah and Joseph exchanged surprised glances. They had hoped for approval to continue their small-scale experiment, but expansion hadn't been discussed. "What do you mean by expansion?" Joseph asked. "We want to establish similar programs on the reservation," Eleanor explained. "Training centers where our young people can learn these combined methods. And we want Sarah to help train other tribal members to become heritage seed keepers." The scope of what Eleanor was proposing took Sarah's breath away. She had gone from caring for half a pouch of seeds to potentially becoming involved in preserving and expanding Apache agricultural knowledge across multiple communities. "There's something else," Robert added. "The university research proposal has been approved. Dr. Martinez will be allowed to document your methods, but only on the condition that any published research includes proper acknowledgement of Apache cultural heritage and that the tribe retains control over how the information is used." Joseph's face lit up with excitement. "That means we can share what we've learned with other drought-affected communities while protecting our cultural integrity." "Exactly," Robert confirmed. "And it means that what happened here, what began when Sarah found you collapsed near her barn, will help preserve our heritage for future generations, while also helping our people adapt to a changing world." As the delegation prepared to leave, Eleanor Whitefeather approached Sarah one final time. "You've done something remarkable here," the elder said quietly. "You've learned to bridge two worlds in a way that honors both. That's a rare gift." Sarah looked out over the garden that had transformed her life, then at Joseph, whose presence had brought purpose and meaning back into her existence. "I think the remarkable thing," Sarah replied, "is how much can grow from a single act of kindness. 6 months ago, I was just trying to help an injured stranger. I had no idea it would lead to all of this. Eleanor smiled. In our tradition, we believe that everything is connected. The seed that falls in fertile ground, the rain that comes at the right time, the person who appears when they're needed most. None of it is accident. As the sun began to set over the desert landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sarah understood that Eleanor was right. What had begun as a chance encounter had grown into something that would benefit not just Joseph's tribe, but potentially countless communities facing similar challenges.